All right, and still talking about expectations from the incoming administration, Nigerians have missed massive infrastructure development, and that's because of the protracted fuel subsidy regime in the country. This is the view of the Nigerian National Petroleum Company Limited. The NNPCL disclosed that the federal government spends as much as 4.8 trillion naira yearly on fuel subsidy at the expense of overall well-being of the Nigerian people. NNPCL believes that the amount spent on fuel subsidy payments can provide Nigerians basic infrastructure, including 7,500 kilometers of road network every year at 400 million naira per kilometer, 37 well-equipped, 120 beds tertiary health centers every year. Well, let's hear how or possible this is with Mr. Ayobami Oyalowo, a development economist who's joining us from our Abuja studio. Good morning, Mr. Oyalowo. Thank you for your time this morning.
Good morning, Ini.
So,
nice to be on your program.
Good to have you. So, the subsidy is supposed to end by mid this year, at least with the new administration. And we see NNPCL giving us numbers and hope now that if subsidy is removed, then every year we can have about 7,500 kilometers of road. Do you see what the NNPCL sees?
Well, while I don't know the numbers the NNPC has dropped, I have my own grounds against the NNPC with the way they have handled a lot of things. I will rather look at the fact that clearly we have a huge infrastructure deficit. And from all indication, we will need about $100 to $150 million per annum within the next 10 years to close the infrastructural gap. And the current administration has tried in terms of trying to create a lot of infrastructure, trying to build roads, trying to build rails, but we still have a huge deficit. And then I think removing the fuel subsidy, it's a good way to start. Because whatever the numbers we've been hearing from the NNPC, they look scary, and I think one of the best way to go about it will be to check the numbers, because sometimes we consume 55 million liters per day. At times we hear 75. The numbers are scary, and then I have a feeling that these things are not the way they are supposed to be. I believe some people are taking advantage of Nigeria, and so let the subsidy leave. Then we can truly know how much we consume in terms of fuel, that is petrol, which is PMS per day in Nigeria as a country. Now, be that as it may, the incoming administration will truly need a lot of funds to be able to continue to meet the infrastructural development of Nigeria. And infrastructure will consist of not just roads and rails and bridges. You look at power, you look at dam, because if you remember, just sometimes last year, we had this very huge flooding that destroyed a lot of lives, properties, and farmlands because of some dams that were opened in some other country. So we will need to have this, and this administration that is coming said they will have a catchment system where you can actually collect this water and prevent the unnecessary losses that we always incur every time we have these dams being opened in this country. So yes, our infrastructural deficit is huge. The money needed is huge. Therefore, any wastages that can be eliminated is a welcome development and a welcome idea, so that you can plot back such kind of funds into developing our infrastructure, building our roads and rails, and developing our economy, so that we can have a country that actually can compete with the modern world that we call ourselves. Because you can't say we're a giant of Africa while we are still nursing some issues that has to do with teething issues as a country.
Interesting that you talked about wastage there, because a lot of people would not say subsidies wastage, because we've even heard NLC threaten that if the government goes ahead to implement the removal of subsidy, that they will have to face some stiff reaction from the NLC, speaking on behalf of the people, according to what they say. So the issue of wastage and where this funding can should or can come from will be a very big question for the incoming administration. If they take away the subsidy, we do know there are consequences. The issue of extreme hike in the price of petrol, among other things, and the overall effect, which will affect food and transportation, and seem to affect every other thing in the country. That would be one thing for the incoming administration to deal with. And even if they don't go that route, and then they still need the fund for this infrastructural gap, we're getting really close when it comes to our borrowings. Our debt is really high at 77 trillion naira. So how or which wastage do you think can be plugged, or where do you think the new administration can look to when it comes to funding for infrastructure?
We must understand that NLC will always say they are fighting for the people, but you ask yourself, which people are they truly fighting for? I remember in your news I was watching now, they said they want to picket the CBN for the cash crunch. Meanwhile, the cash crunch has been with us for the last 3 months. They didn't do anything. It is after the election has gone that they want to start pretending to be fighting for the people. Honestly, the NLC has been a disappointment. The kind of fight they pick up, you find out that it's practically not reasonable kind of fight they pick up. So I would rather not talk about them, because this is not about playing politics with the lives of Nigeria. It's about reality. You just mentioned our level of debt now. So if you look at the kind of debt we have put in, we are sitting on, you have to say, what can we do to reduce this indebtedness and to build our infrastructure? What are the things we need to do? We need to do away with wastages. Honestly, I am not convinced we are consuming over 60 million liters of fuel per day. I refuse to believe that figure. I believe there's a huge lot of lies underneath somewhere there that nobody has bothered to look into. So if we remove that amount of money that is being thrown into that area, because you hear news of fuel being smuggled to neighboring countries, because while we are paying this subsidy here to make it 195 naira per liter, in neighboring countries it goes for 400, 500 naira per liter. So anybody could easily pay bribe to take a truck, 2 trucks, 10 trucks out of the country to go and sell at 400 naira when he has been paid subsidy here in Nigeria. So that's what we've been facing. So I support the fact that subsidy should go, as long as this money is paid, is plowed back into building good lives for Nigerians. We have, we've talked about rails, we talk about roads, talk about bridges, but we also will remember that we need a lot of tertiary health facilities in Nigeria. It is the reason why people go abroad and get caught, because of simple things that could have been done here if we have a proper system that works. So our tertiary, because of course I'm talking about tertiary because this is federal government we're talking about now, the primary health centers and I think the secondary ones should naturally be issues for state local government. So the tertiary health you're looking at cancer, modern cancer center, you're looking at dialysis center, you're looking at so many other huge infrastructural development in the health sector. So you will need a lot of money that you put into this area so that we can have development that continue. The current administration that is outgoing has done a lot in terms of roads and bridges. I remember since I started following news and events, since 1983, you hear we will build second Niger Bridge. Then when we came in 1999, we will build second Niger Bridge. Then 2011, we will build second Niger Bridge, until the Buhari administration came in and built it. So they have started on a good note, and they are leaving a solid foundation. I also know that there was no functional rail between Lagos and Ibadan, Abeokuta and Ibadan. Now that has been put in place, and there are plans already ongoing to cover the entire Nigeria in terms of rail network. So I think when people begin to see this, and when we talk about the fact that it will affect the price of food, it is true. But you also must look at, if you have public system of transportation that works, the need for private transport, commercial transportation will reduce to a large extent if you can move goods from, let's say you are moving perishable food item from, let's say, Kano to Lagos. It's cheaper from Kano to Lagos if you use a rail system that works than if you hire a truck that could break down on the road, wait for 2-3 days before it is fixed, and the entire perishable good is damaged in that process. So you have to look at the pros and cons. There will be challenges, no doubt about it, but when you look at the short-term issues compared to the long-term gains that will be made if all these things are put in place, you begin to realize that this is a sacrifice we have to make. We cannot continue to pay subsidy for consumption that is a waste. If we're going to subsidize, I would rather we subsidize agriculture so that the level of price of food and things that edible things can come down to the barest minimum. I know the government, this current government, have tried in terms of creating all this. The CBN has gone out of its way, but we have not seen the result. You see the anchor borrower till today as we speak, nobody knows how much has been put into that program. Nobody knows how much has been spent and has been returned in terms of the loans that were taken in the anchor borrower program. You find out that some organizations that were created like the NASA, it has been plagued with a lot of corruption and allegations which they have refused to investigate. The EFCC were supposed to have investigated the former MD that was removed for corruption. Till today, we don't know what has happened. So these are areas that we need to look at. If you pour a lot of money into agriculture, it will reduce food prices, and when you reduce food inflation, the level of inflation in other areas will be manageable and minimal.
All right, Mr. Yellow, just briefly now, because we are already out of time, you are supporting the removal of subsidy. We do know that presently the federal government has formed a committee that's supposed to look at buffers to use, to reduce some of the impact, expected impact at the removal of subsidy. What from your perspective, because we know a former administration, that of the former president, Jonathan, did try it. We had buses and all of that. I don't know how impactful that was. But how do you think, or what would be the best approach for this committee or for the federal government in removal of this subsidy? What can they put in place, to buffer some of the impact of it?
I have given an example of food inflation. If you are able to ensure that inflation in food prices is curtailed, one, if food prices don't jump up astronomically, then it makes life less difficult for people. Also, public transportation system. I know the current Ministry of Petroleum was trying to work on gas and stuff, but you see, they just create these things, make so much noise, and you don't see any result. I am hoping that the incoming administration will look at some other subsidies in terms of, some other options, in terms of curbing these challenges. But like I said, and like you also told me just now, we have a committee that is looking at buffers. Those buffers must include, but not limited to, checking how you can deal with the workers, their salaries, their emolument. And then if you are able to deal with public transportation, like I said earlier on, it will reduce the challenges, because what normally happens is cost of moving goods and services, especially food item from point A to point B, will be affected automatically if you increase the price of fuel. But if that is worked on, then we can have a better system so that the prices of food don't jump up astronomically and make the lives of Nigerians
All right, Mr. Ayobami Oyalowo, thank you so much, development economist, for sharing your views with us this morning. We appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.
Let's take a break now. When we come back, an interesting one. Do you know that states can now supply and produce electricity? We'll have that conversation after this break. It's here on Business Morning on Channels Television.